Welcome to PowerPivot video number 7. Hey, if you'd like to download this workbook and follow along, click on the link below the video. Hey, this is video number 7. This is a continuation of building our data model. So let's go ahead and go over to PowerPivot, Manage Data Model, or Alt-BM. We have, in earlier videos, imported our tables. We went over to diagram view. We had relationships between tables, and we left off in our last video. Here's our calendar table or date table. So we're going to go back to data view, and this is where we're going to work. We're going to build calculated columns for month number, month, year, quarter, and fiscal quarter. And we will learn something very important about sorting so that your date groupings in your pivot table will work. Now, right off the bat, I'm going to click in this top column. I want to format it as a date. It comes in automatically with dates and times, but we can format it just as a date. Now, let's come to this calculated column, and we first need to calculate month number. Double click that column header and month number. Enter. Now, here's a good thing. We're going to use the month function. Tab, and the month function is exactly like in Excel. Now, this is the D calendar table, down arrow date, close parentheses, and enter. And so now we have the number. And if we scroll down, we can see there's 1, 2, etc. Now, that's really important. And we have lots of dates here, right? If I click here, control down arrow, we have all the way till 16. Control home. This is going to be very important for sorting. Now, what we would like over in our pivot table for a monthly report is we would like the actual month name. So I'm going to come up here, double click, and call this month name. Now, since these fields are going to show up in a field list, and later we'll see how to hide some of them so they don't show in the field list, I'm actually going to leave this one as month. This is the one we'll use in our pivot table. Enter. Now, if we were over in Excel, we could use the text function to look at our serial number date and then format it with a custom number formatting. But check this out. Over in PowerPivot, we say equals FO. Format function is the substitute for the text function tab. We could simply say DC, down arrow, we have our table name and our field name tab, comma, and that format is just like our format over in the text function, and we can use the same custom number formatting. MMM gives me the 3-month abbreviation. End double quote. Notice this is exactly the same syntax as the text function, except for, of course, we would have a cell reference there, and that would be text. Close parentheses, enter. If we wanted it as the full month, we would put 4 M's up here and enter. I'm going to leave it as 3, backspace, enter. Now, let's go ahead and create our pivot table and see if we can now, finally, after 2 calculated columns, build a monthly report. Click over on the pivot table. I'm going to put it on this existing sheet. Click OK. Now, before we even use our new calculated columns, I'm going to show you, just like I did in the last video, I'm going to drag date down to rows. That's from the fact table. This is how we would do it in a normal pivot table. Right click. Oh, man, there's no grouping. Yes, as we said in the last video, no grouping in PowerPivot of dates. Now, that's why we have to build those calculated columns. So I'm going to drag this off, come up, and now let's go over to D calendar. And here we go, months. Yay, now I'm ready to know we're not going to go. Check that out. They're really going to make this difficult over in PowerPivot. Hey, it's sorted alphabetically. So now, Alt-Tab to go back over to our PowerPivot window. And watch this. Once you have month number and month, you have to tell this column to sort in accordance with the month numbers. So we click in a single cell. We come over to Sort and Filter, and there it is. Sort by column. Click. We're going to sort the month column by month number. Click OK. Alt-Tab. And now we have our months in the right order. So remember, when you're trying to do months, and we will encounter other situations where we're grouping. Later we'll use our sales categories, and we'll run into the same problem. Some column doesn't sort right. You're actually going to have to base the sort off of some other column that is sorted correctly. All right, so now we have our months. We can simply come down to our fact table. Now we do not have our column yet for net revenue, but I'm going to summarize units. This is a perfectly all right calculation to do. However, it is an implicit calculation, which means we're depending on the pivot table internal functions to do this. And in general, we don't want to do this, but we do want to illustrate the point. Oh, wait a second. There is no relationship. These dates are coming from our calendar table, and these units are coming from our fact table. So now we're going to go back over to PowerPivot. Now we're going to go to Diagram View, and no problem. We're going to eventually have a bunch of columns here. We should have just done this in the first place. Click on the dates, and we're going to drag it over to dates. And now it will create a one-to-many relationship with dates, right? We talked about how when we create our calendar table, you have to have a unique list of your dates. Now, the calendar table, if we go back over here and look at the calendar table, notice for the 3 years, it has our unique list of dates for the 3-year period. Now, there aren't going to be sales on every date, but for our calendar table to work, you want to start at the beginning and go all the way. Don't skip any date. Back in Diagram View, we have this. Now we can go over to our Excel workbook, and sure enough, it is working fine. So that's how you can group by month. Now, why would we do it in PowerPivot? Because we're building a big reporting system based on multiple external data sources. And we want to build it one time and have it automatically refreshed over time. If you were just doing a simple monthly report on a data set that could easily fit in Excel, by all means, use the grouping feature in Pivot Table because it's awesome. Now, we've done month, but sometimes you want year or quarter or fiscal quarter. So let's go back over to our Manage Data Model. I'm going to click on Data View, and let's continue. I'm going to double click at the top. Hey, this is going to be year. Enter. Equals YEA. Notice it jumps to the top. The year functions exactly like it is in Excel. DC, down arrow for date, tab, close parentheses, and enter. Now year, now we can go back over to our pivot table. And now in our calendar, we have year. So I can drag year to columns. And just like that, we have our years and our months and the summarization of units. Now, we'll make explicit calculations later, but we're just learning about how the calendar table and these calculated columns work. Let's go back over to Manage Data Model. Now we'd like to do quarter. All right, so you ready? I'm going to double click Add Column. And this first example is just going to be January through March is 1. April through June is going to be 2, etc. So quarter, enter. Now, there's a few ways we can calculate this. I'm going to use the ceiling function. So equals CE, and the ceiling function also works the same as it does over in Excel. So the number is going to be month number, so DC. And now I'm going to arrow down to month number. Remember, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So we have 1 through 12 that's going to sit in the number argument. And what the ceiling does is it rounds up. So I'm going to always round up to 3. So now 1, 2, and 3 will round up to 3. Now that's not going to work because that'll give me, if I hit Enter, it gives me 3 all the way down where I want 1. If we were to look at the next quarter, it's 6. So up here, we simply divide by 3, Enter. And now we have our proper quarter. 1. So for all the way February's, March's, and when we get to the 1st of April, it's 2. So that'll work all the way down. Now that's not quite what we're going to need. I'm going to come over here and create a third column. This will be, and actually I want to come over back over here and double click and call this quarter number. All right, and now we're going to double click over here and we're going to call this quarter. Now, if we're going to create a label, remember what's beautiful about what we did here for month and year and quarter is now we're extending the date table with filters or criteria we're going to drop into the pivot table. So this one, the year, the quarter, it can be dropped into the row, the column, the filter, and the slicer area. All right, so quarter. We could do this a few ways. I'm actually choose the year first. So I'm going to say DC, arrow, arrow, arrow for year. And I'm going to join it with, using the ampersand, double quotes, space, dash, space, quarter, space, end double quote, ampersand, DC, down arrow to quarter number tab, and then enter. What's so nice about doing the year before the quarter is this column will automatically sort correctly. Now, before we go over to a pivot table, I do want to go over to the F sales. Now, we could use the pivot table internal function, but there's advantages to explicit calculated fields. One is that we can use it over and over. We can use it in other pivot tables. We can use it in other formulas. And we can add number formatting. So the way we create our calculated fields is to first type, and when I type it's going to jump up here. We're going to first type the name of the calculated field as it will appear in the field list. And because we're down in F sales, this calculated field or measure will show up in the F sales field list in our pivot table. So you ready? We're going to say total units, and then colon equal sum. We're coming from the F sales, and I'm going to down arrow to get units. Tab, close parentheses. Enter. And I'm going to click and drag just to see that there's no number formatting. And now I'm going to go up and say 1,000 separator. And how about decrease decimals, because these are units. Now, as we mentioned in earlier videos, this is one way to create your calculated field. If you want to look at the dialog box, we actually have to go back up to Excel. And then there it is, calculated fields, manage calculated fields. And there it is. We could edit and look at it there. That is one way to do it. I like using the measure grid. I'm going to click Escape, Close, Alt-Tab. So there we have it. Now, when we drop this into our pivot table with our new criteria from our calculated column, we will automatically have our number formatting. We'll go up and click the Pivot Table button. I want to put it on the existing sheet. I do not want it in B3. I'm going to click the Collapse button. I'm going to be dangerous here and put it in G1. I'm not going to pivot this anymore, so that will work. Click OK, click OK. Now I can go up to my calendar and get my quarter, drop it down to rows. Now I can drag down to F sales, and I'm going to use not my implicit function on units. I'm going to use my calculated field or measure down to values. I love that. Look at that. There are our quarters. We built this as a calculated column. It now is the criteria we drop into the row area. We have our calculated field or measure. And as we mentioned earlier, that measure, if we go back over here and look, it gave us the total for the whole column. But once we drop it into the pivot table, that one formula understands filter context. So here it knows to get just the total units for 2014 quarter 3. Every time this formula right here sees a set of criteria, in this case just one condition, it actually filters the underlying table and then calculates the answer. Now, to illustrate this further, let's pretend that we're the formula. We've been given this criteria, 2015 quarter 3, and here's what happens. We would first look over to the calendar table. We would look for, in the quarter column, all of the rows that have 2015 quarter 3. This table would be filtered. And then, just a small sample, over from the date column, we would have a unique list of dates. 9/17, 9/18, 9/18, etc. These dates would then, because this is the primary key and it's connected to the sales table, these list of dates would then filter the sales table, and only the dates that show up in the filtered calendar table will show up here, and thus only the units. Now, we cannot see that here because this is just the surface of our data model window. But underneath in the columnar database, that is happening. Now, why does that work? In essence, we have the criteria 215, quarter 3 from our pivot table, right? But how does it then filter this? Or how does it filter the other table? It does it through the relationship. So I go over to diagram view. Boom, that one right there, because there is a unique list of dates. It then flows over to the fact table. The fact table is then filtered. So we give the criteria from the pivot table. It gets filtered. This whole table gets filtered. We only have a certain number of dates. That then filters this fact table on the date. And boom, we get our answer. So back in our pivot table, we actually don't need to know any of that, right? We just drop the criteria here and boom, it's the right answer. Now we want to go back to our calendar table and we want to consider fiscal quarters. Now our quarter here, quarter 1 was January, February, March. But what if your quarter doesn't start in January? Now the example we'll do here is we'll consider the end of the year to be March 31st. So in that case, instead of 1, we have to have quarter 4. So let's come over here. I'm going to double click and we're going to call this fiscal quarter number. And as always, there's a few ways we could do this. I'm going to use the if function. All right, so I'm jumped up to the formula bar and I'm going to actually look at the month. So DC and then down to the month number. Now 1, 2, 3 would really be 4. So I'm going to say anytime you are less than 4, then what do I want? I want a 4. Otherwise, please give me the quarter, DC, and down to quarter number tab. Now this will not work because this will give me 2, 3, 4 when I really want 1, 2, 3. So I'm simply going to subtract 1, close parentheses, enter. And there we have. If we scroll down, we can see we have 4. And then beginning April 1st, we're going to have 1. Control Home. Now we're going to also need fiscal year. And in this case, we want to look over here, and we could use the year function, or we could use this right here. Anytime the month is less than 3, then we need to subtract 1 from the year. Fiscal year, enter. Equals if DC, and I'm going to down arrow to month number. If that is less than 4, then I want to take DC, down arrow to year, subtract 1. So for this first date over here, 14 will become 13. Otherwise, DC and then year. Tab, close parentheses, and enter. So now we should have our 4 and 13. Scroll down and we can see there it is April. Now we get to 14. Control Home. That jumps us back to the top over there. Now we're going to need a final column for fiscal quarter. Fiscal quarter, enter. Now I'm going to do the same formula we did before. Equals DC, and I'm going to look for fiscal year, ampersand, double quote, space, capital Q, space, end double quote, ampersand, DC, and I want to find fiscal quarter number. So there we have fiscal quarter number, and enter. Oh, I'm gonna add a space. So I'm gonna click before the or after the first double quote, space, dash, enter. All right, and so now we have our fiscal quarter. If we want to create a pivot table, let's click our pivot table. I'm going to say on existing sheet, and I'm going to be dangerous again. Click the collapse button. I'm going to put it in J1. Click OK. Click OK. All right, I'm going to scroll over a little bit. And now from our calendar table, I'm going to take, and let's learn a new trick here. We have all these fields, and we don't need some of them like month number and quarter number. Alt-Tab to go back to our data model. Let's go over to diagram view. And here is our calendar table. Watch this. I can right-click a field and say Hide from Client Tool. Not only that, but let's see. I want quarter number, and I'm going to use the Control key. To select items not next to each other, non-contiguous, right-click, hide from client tools. Now, actually, if we come over to data view, they will appear grayed out. But if we come over to our pivot table, check this out. They are not there. They are hidden from our pivot table field list. All right, I'm going to say fiscal quarter, drag down to rows. And check that out. That is beautiful. Now I can come down and get my calculated field, fact table, total units. Boom, just like that. And now I want to come down here and name this sheet. Double click. I'm going to call it PT1-3, enter. And now I want to create a final report for this video on a new sheet. So I'm going to click in the cell instead of going back to the Manage Data Model window. I'm just going to use the keyboard, Alt-N-V. And we're going to use an external data source. Now check this out. It means external to the Excel workbook. Choose connection, tables tab, and there's our this workbook data model. So I click and open. Now we've selected that. I definitely want to put it on a new sheet. Click OK. All right, so now we're going to build from the calendar table. I'm going to drag months down the rows, year on the columns, go down from fact sales. We're going to use our calculate field for total units. And watch this. This is the third time I think we've used this calculated field, and the number format shows up every time. I love that. That's already 3 clicks we didn't have to do. And now let's go ahead, and we are actually viewing the pivot table tools analyze ribbon tab. So I'm going to click insert slicer. I want to go to products table. I don't see it, so now I'm going to click on all. No way I can pull a slicer from any one of these. I'm going to select product name, click OK, and just like that, starting to build an awesome report. Carlota instantly. Bellin. If I want Bellin and quad, I hold the control, and just like that, from our data model, we have built this pivot table with some criteria we created from the date column, and then some criteria in our slicer from the products table, and then our calculation from the fact sales table. Actually, I better come down here just to be consistent. PT4, enter. Oh, and there's still one more thing. Column labels, row labels. We never like that. So we go to Design, Report Layout, Tabular. All right, so in this video, we built a few awesome pivot tables using our calendar table. We started with a unique list of dates, did month number, month year, quarter number, quarter, even fiscal number, fiscal year, fiscal quarter. And in our next video, we will create some new calculated fields and calculate columns and make some new reports. All right, we'll see you next video.